Good morning. I love to tell stories. Sometimes I'm amazed at how often I am tempted to break out in a story, especially if that story is entertaining and makes me look good. Some stories, though, come out of a crisis, perhaps an individual crisis or a communal crisis, and the story will often take shape when particular questions are asked. Who are we? Where do I fit? Where are we going from here? Out of these questions, we may form an identity that is revealed in the stories that we then tell. And because things change, we either have to tell different stories or we have to tweak the story that we tell. When life is moving along at a steady pace, our stories will follow accordingly, perhaps adjusting it with little changes, because all is well. Normally, we can keep up with ourselves, but when a drastic change occurs, the stories we tell of ourselves, of our people, will change accordingly. When Dean and I arrived in Fresno in November of 2021, our first Sunday we came here, it was a new story for us. This congregation was already in the midst of a changing and growing story, a story of identity, a story of transformation. So in preparing for the message this morning, I did some search, and I found a piece in the Anabaptist World written in November of 2021, and saw these words spoken by our own Lynn Jost. He says of the Willow Avenue Mennonite Church at that point, from its inception in the 1960s, the congregation has tried to offer a place where difficult questions can be addressed, sometimes in ways that open doors for other MBs. He said, the conversation regarding inclusion flows out of the congregation's decades-old mission statement to follow Jesus Christ daily and radically, be it an inclusive community without discrimination. Thanks, Lynn. This was an important moment in the story of this congregation. And though I missed most of the story, I've heard enough to know that the story was individual and it was communal. It's a story of belonging and inquiring and transforming. I've heard the stories, and it's clear that the change didn't come quickly. And not everyone was happy all of the time. And throughout the process, there was a lot of listening, a lot of praying, discussing, maybe some disagreeing, and working together, and the story was being written and perhaps rewritten and continues to be written. Isaiah tells a story of a people in crisis. The ancient Israelite people told stories of a trustworthy God who had chosen them, a God who took care of them, a God who freed them from oppression. They were the people in relationship with God. God was their identity, and they understood God as a God of strength and steadfastness. And then the tables were turned. The Babylonian Empire defeated them in battle, destroyed the city, left them without leadership, left them without hope. And it was into this emptiness and loss of identity that the prophet Isaiah spoke the words in chapter 40, reminding them that their stories and of their God. Isaiah connected the ancient to their present. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told to you from the very beginning? They needed, perhaps like we need sometimes, to be reminded of who God is. That God is eternal and God is powerful, and the rulers of the earth are not. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root in the ground that he blows on them, and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. The people felt abandoned by God, but Isaiah brings them back to their own stories. Have you not heard? Then he reminds them that humans get weary, that we get weary. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength, he says. They shall mount up their wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. And what a beautiful image of that we received with the children. It's an old story. It's an old story of crisis and hope and encouragement. It was a story retold in order to give the people back their identity in a time of change. The crisis in our Isaiah text was one of defeat and exile. The crisis when Jesus started his ministry was the Roman Empire and its dominance over the Jewish territories. So we move to Mark. Jesus' story begins in Capernaum, where on the Sabbath, while in the synagogue, he is teaching and casting out evil spirits. Soon after leaving the synagogue, Jesus and his first 4 disciples go to Simon's home, where they learn that Simon's mother-in-law is in bed with a fever. Jesus goes to her, takes her hand, helps her up. The fever is gone. So that evening, when the Sabbath had ended, crowds of people arrived at the house to be healed, seeking Jesus. Likely many of these people were poor and vulnerable because they were sick, or they were sick because they were poor and vulnerable. Healing passages may make some of us squirm a little. They remind us that the Bible is an ancient text from a different worldview. Not only is Jesus healing on the Sabbath, but he's upsetting the social order. And that's an important part of the story. Reverend Sarah Barron of the United Methodist Church in Schenectady, New York, says this: if we as people of faith try to focus on those needing healing from our 21st century eyes, we will look at the symptoms and the diseases and get distracted by our own theories of healing. In doing so, we can miss the symbolism that brings the greatest meaning. Illness isn't actually as simple as the moderns like to think of it. It's more than physical symptoms. Illness itself is perceived culturally and has cultural impacts. Of course, it impacts those who are ill, but it is also understood within the stories of time and place. Stories, she says, form around particular illnesses, often quite potent ones. Worse yet, illness serves to distance the individual from their community. So, understanding the stories of Jesus' healing requires us to enter into a perspective of illness at that time and of that place. When a person was healed, they were enabled to rejoin society. It allows them to take a higher and safer place in the hierarchy of society. This must have been really aggravating to the powers that be, because by healing, Jesus is raising the downtrodden and diminishing the power of the powerful. Thus, the stories of healing by Jesus serve to reclaim God's identity, to disrupt the narratives of the empire, to restore the identity of the Palestinian people. What I think Jesus was doing is kicking up some dust. Jesus was changing the story, and it takes courage to follow Jesus, to confront and challenge the injustices that surround us. Isaiah and Mark's story speak of change. They speak of remembering, of confronting, and of being a part of the healing. Writing the story where the forgotten are acknowledged and the sick are made whole, perhaps even causing us to kick up some dust and challenge the system when injustice is at play. Like Isaiah's brilliant writing in chapter 40, we need to connect to the stories of the past and respond to our present so that we can better recognize God. May we pay attention. May we hear the stories again and again of how God moved, how God moves in our lives, how God is helping us write and rewrite our personal and our communal story. Like the Israelites, may we remember where we came from and where we're headed. What was the passion that drove this community to be inclusive, to ask the tough questions, to face the injustices, to be transformed? May we remember that. And may our story continue to be written as we grow in understanding of God and our identity as God's people. Finally, as we turn toward the communion table this morning, let us hear once again the final words in our text from Mark. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. No doubt Jesus was tired. He was met with one crisis after another. So when no one was looking, he sneaked away, went to that quiet place where he could just simply rest in God's presence, bask in God's decadent love, for the story was being told. Jesus was telling the story that we are all a part of. As we continue our journey, may we continue to listen to God's voice, to pay attention, to consider where we came from, to see where God is leading us as we write and rewrite our story. May it be so. Amen.